The true horror began not with teeth and claws, but with a whisper, a subtle chill in the vast swirling currents of the warp itself. For centuries, perhaps even millennia, before the first Hive Fleet was officially identified, a creeping disquiet had begun to permeate the psychic fabric of the Milky Way galaxy. It was an almost imperceptible distortion, a distant note of discord in the symphony of souls, a growing static in the astral winds that blew through the minds of humanity's psychers. Initially, it manifested as nothing more than an unusual strain, a profound sense of isolation for those who reached out across the void. Astropaths, the living conduits of Imperial communication, found their signals occasionally faltering, their minds struggling against an unseen resistance that made distant stars feel impossibly far away. Sanctioned psychers, those who dared to wield the raw energies of the Imperium, reported an increasing sense of dread during their meditations, a feeling of being watched from an unimaginable distance, as if a great, cold eye was slowly turning its gaze towards them. They often described it as a growing coldness, a vacuum that didn't just absorb light and heat, but also hope and mental clarity. This phenomenon was not confined to a single sector or a particular segmentum. It was a diffuse, spreading malaise, like a contagion of cosmic anxiety, affecting sensitive individuals from the galactic core to the furthest reaches of the segmentum Pacificus. As centuries turned into millennia, this nascent disturbance solidified into something far more tangible, far more terrifying: the shadow in the warp. This was not merely a psychic storm or a turbulent patch of the Imperium. It was an active, malevolent suppression, a deliberate psychic blanketing effect that preceded every Tyranid incursion. When a Hive Fleet drew near, the shadow would intensify, becoming a palpable, crushing weight upon the minds of all psychers within its ever-expanding radius. It was as though an enormous, ravenous intellect was asserting its dominance over the very medium of thoughts and spirit. Astropathic communications would utterly fail, their signals choked off as if a giant, unseen hand had simply severed the connection. Psychers found their powers guttering, their connection to the warp severed or dangerously warped, often leaving them insane, comatose, or dead from the psychic backlash. For the more robust psychers, it was an agonizing sensation of spiritual drowning, their minds screaming against the impossible pressure of an alien will utterly devoid of compassion or understanding. Even the most powerful librarians of the Space Marine chapters found themselves reduced to mere mortals, their mental might rendered impotent before this unseen alien force. The feeling it evoked in all who sensed it was universally described as primordial terror, the instinctual dread of a predator so vast, so alien, that it defied all comprehension. Long before the Tyranids were truly identified, there were fragmented records, unconfirmed sightings, and chilling legends that, with the terrible clarity of hindsight, may well have been the first distant echoes of the Great Devourer's approach. Ancient Xenos races, long extinguished, left cryptic warnings of a star scourge or a cosmic plague that devoured worlds, not for conquest, but for sustenance. Isolated Imperial outposts on the fringes of galactic space reported strange patterns of stellar dimming, worlds mysteriously going silent, their populations vanishing without a trace, leaving behind only sterilized husks. These were not the usual raids of orcs or dark eldar, nor the slow, creeping necrosis of chaos. These were clean, absolute disappearances, leaving nothing but a barren emptiness where life had once thrived. Rogue traders spoke of uncharted systems where all biological life had been stripped from planetary surfaces, leaving behind only the bare rock. Such reports were often dismissed as drunken boasts, exaggerated tales, or merely the ravings of those driven mad by the isolation of deep space. The Imperium, vast and bureaucratic, focused on the threats it understood: heresy, mutant cults, internal strife, and the known Xenos empires that warred along its borders. The thought of something utterly external, an enemy from beyond the galactic rim, was too alien, too unthinkable to truly grasp. Perhaps the most profound, though entirely unwitting, harbinger of the Tyranid threat can be traced back to the darkest days of the Horus heresy, specifically to the destruction of the Pharos device. On the world of Sotha, far within the Ultima Segmentum, stood the Pharos, a miracle of ancient Xenos technology repurposed by the Imperium. It was a psychic beacon, a vast and immensely powerful navigation aid that projected a beam of warp light across unfathomable distances, making safe passage possible through the treacherous currents of the Immaterium. During the heresy, this vital device became a strategic target. In an act of calculated malice, the Night Lord's Legion, under the command of their Terran-born first captain, Talos Valkyron, assaulted Sotha with the explicit intent of destroying the Pharos, plunging a critical sector of the Imperium into darkness and chaos. The subsequent destruction of the Pharos was not merely an explosion, it was a cataclysm of unimaginable scale. The ancient technology, overloaded and collapsing, unleashed an immense, uncontrolled burst of psychic energy. This was a detonation that ripped a hole in reality, a multi-dimensional scream of energy that resonated not just through real space and the warp, but potentially across the very fabric of dimensions. It was an event of such raw, unbridled power that, in the chilling clarity of hindsight, many within the Ordo Xenos speculate it served as a cosmic beacon. Imagine, if you will, a vast ocean, and in its darkest depths, a single, powerful lighthouse. Then, imagine that lighthouse in a single, brilliant, and utterly destructive flash, exploding with an intensity that dwarfs any lesser light. That catastrophic surge of energy, radiating outward from Sotha, would have been an unavoidable, impossible-to-ignore signal across the terrifying voids of intergalactic space. The speculation, though terrifying, is difficult to refute. This singular, cataclysmic event, occurring some 10,000 years before the true arrival of Hive Fleet Behemoth, may have been the very sound that drew the Tyranids towards the Milky Way. An unthinking, unconscious summons to the greatest biological horror the galaxy would ever know. The sheer scale of the energy released, echoing across the vast, cold gulf between galaxies, could have resonated with the distant, slumbering awareness of the Tyranid collective consciousness, drawing their insatiable hunger towards this new, vibrant source of biomass. It was a tragic irony. A device designed to bring light and safe passage, in its destruction, unknowingly illuminated the path for the Great Devourer. While the Pharos device may have provided the initial navigational fix, the true approach of the Tyranids remained a slow, agonizing process. The Hive fleets, traveling at sub-light speeds across the intergalactic void, were not instant invaders. Their arrival was a procession of eons, a journey through the emptiness between galaxies, fueled by the biomass of countless other worlds and even other galaxies. During this immense journey, the shadow in the warp would have been their leading edge, a growing psychic pressure wave preceding the physical fleets by centuries, perhaps even millennia. It was a growing chill that seeped into the galactic consciousness, an increasingly strong resonance of dread that, for the most part, went unheeded. The Imperium, recovering from the catastrophic civil war of the heresy, was inward-looking. Its institutions were shattered, its worlds ravaged, and its primary focus was on rebuilding, rooting out heresy, and defending against the immediate, tangible threats of chaos and known xenos. The thought of an entirely new, utterly alien threat emerging from beyond the galactic boundaries was simply too far outside their paradigm. The scattered reports of silent worlds, the growing psychic static, the inexplicable sense of dread felt by sensitive individuals, all were dismissed, explained away, or simply lost in the labyrinthine bureaucracy of a galaxy struggling to redefine itself. They were blinded by their own internal conflicts, deafened by the screams of a galaxy in turmoil, and utterly oblivious to the true, monstrous nature of the gathering storm that was relentlessly, silently approaching from the blackness between the stars. The Great Devourer was coming, and the galaxy, for all its might and millennia of experience, was utterly unprepared. The silence before the storm, however, was not absolute. Astropathic choirs across the eastern fringe began to experience dissonances, whispers of a vast, hungry emptiness that devoured even the light of the Astronomenican. Rogue traders, daring to venture beyond charted space, reported ghost systems, worlds stripped bare of life, husks of planets orbiting dead suns. But these were dismissed as warp phenomena, or the depredations of lesser Xenos raiders. The true nature of the approaching doom remained veiled until the final, horrific unveiling in the year 745 of the 41st millennium. It began not with a roar, but with a silent, inexorable tide of bioforms, a living armada emerging from the void. Hive Fleet Behemoth, for that was the designation given to this first monstrous vanguard, did not announce its presence with conventional warp translations or the energy signatures of voidcraft. It simply arrived, a crushing wave of chitin and hunger, a vast organic entity that defied all known astrogation principles. Its shadow fell first upon the unsuspecting star systems of the Ultima Segmentum, a region already reeling from persistent orc incursions and the occasional flare-up of chaos cults. The initial encounters were devastatingly one-sided. Imperial Navy patrols, accustomed to engaging enemy cruisers and destroyers, found themselves confronted by bioships that consumed their shots, regenerated their damage, and moved with an unnatural predatory grace. These were not ships in the conventional sense. They were colossal organisms, living engines of war, propelled by biological drives and armed with acidic spore launchers, crushing tendrils, and psychic screamers that ripped apart the minds of their crew. Whole flotillas vanished, their last astropathic pleas dying in farbled static before any coherent threat assessment could be made. One of the first significant worlds to fall was Tyran Prime, a relatively minor agri-world, but one that served as a crucial waypoint for resupply routes into the Segmentum Solar. Its fate became a chilling harbinger of what was to come. When the Tyranid vanguard reached the system, the Imperial forces there, primarily a small PDF garrison and a handful of system defense frigates, were utterly annihilated. The bioships descended, not in a conventional invasion, but in a horrific, systematic consumption. Spores rained down, carrying millions upon millions of lesser bioforms, ravenous hormagaunts, scuttling termagants, lumbering carnifexes. The world's atmosphere was rapidly poisoned, its oceans boiled, its forests devoured, its very biomass systematically stripped away. Within days, Tyran Prime, a verdant and life-sustaining world, was reduced to a barren, airless rock, its crust scraped clean, its planetary core perhaps even tapped for its geothermal energy. All that remained was a chilling monument to utter biological predation. The scattered distress calls, the horrifying images of worlds turning gray and dead, slowly filtered back to Segmentum Command. Panic began to ripple through the Imperial bureaucracy. Admirals struggled to comprehend a foe that had no discernible command structure, no recognizable motives beyond total consumption, and that fought with an alien ruthlessness never before witnessed. Imperial Guard regiments, deployed to defend other threatened worlds, found their conventional tactics utterly useless against the sheer, overwhelming numbers of the Tyranid swarms. Trench lines were overrun by tides of chitinous monstrosities. Artillery bombardments seemed to only scatter the enemy temporarily, and the very ground beneath their feet could erupt with burrowing horrors. The confusion was compounded by the Tyranids' unique psychic presence, the shadow in the warp. This oppressive psychic static smothered astropathic communication, severed Imperial commanders from their wider networks, and instilled a debilitating sense of dread and despair in any sentient mind caught within its oppressive field. It was a weapon as potent as any biocannon, sowing chaos and fear before the first claw even touched ground. Hive Fleet Behemoth, true to its designation, then split into two colossal tendrils. One headed further into the segmentum, seemingly drawn by the density of biomass and psychic echoes. The other, the larger and more aggressive of the two, set an inexorable course for the Ultramarines' home system of Ultramar, and specifically the heart world of Macragge. The Ultramarines, masters of logistics, strategy, and unyielding defense, quickly understood the gravity of the threat. Chapter Master Marneus Calgar, a figure already legendary for his tactical brilliance and indomitable will, immediately began marshalling the chapter's full might. Every available battle barge, strike cruiser, and smaller voidcraft was recalled to the Macragge system. The system's formidable orbital defenses, a network of gun platforms, void shield generators, and defense satellites were brought to peak readiness. Reinforcements from other chapters within the Ultima Segmentum, though few in number and already stretched thin, began to arrive, recognizing the strategic importance of Macragge. The Battle of Macragge itself began in the void, a confrontation on a scale rarely seen in Imperial history. The Ultramarines' fleet, though numbering in the hundreds of vessels, was utterly dwarfed by the sheer, unimaginable mass of Hive Fleet Behemoth's bioships. The Void War was a maelstrom of destruction as Imperial macro cannons and lance batteries poured torrents of fire into the oncoming organic armada. But for every Tyranid bioship vaporized, 10 more seemed to take its place. The Tyranids fought with a terrifying instinctual coordination, focusing their attacks on key Imperial vessels, overwhelming escorts, and systematically dismantling defensive formations. Chapter Master Calgar's flagship, the Macragge's Honor, became the focal points of the defense, its mighty weapons roaring as it spearheaded desperate counterattacks. The Ultramarine strategy was one of attrition and sacrifice, buying precious time for the ground defenses of Macragge to prepare. Many venerable warships, many brave Imperial Navy crews, and many Space Marines were lost in the chilling void, holding the line against the encroaching tide of ravenous life. Despite their heroic efforts, the Ultramarines could only delay the inevitable. Billions of smaller Tyranid bioforms, including mycetic spores laden with ground troops, began to punch through the tattered remnants of the Void Shield network, streaking through the atmosphere of Macragge itself. The planet's surface became a theater of unimaginable horror. The Ultramarines had prepared as best they could. Massive fortifications had been erected, entire cities transformed into interconnected bastions, and millions of Imperial Guard and PDF troops, bolstered by the stoic warriors of the Ultramarines themselves, stood ready. Yet nothing could truly prepare them for the sheer alien ferocity and numbers of the Tyranid ground invasion. The Battle of Macragge raged across the ice-locked continents and frozen tundras of the planet's northern hemisphere. The Tyranids, guided by the overwhelming will of the hive mind, adapted with terrifying speed. Initial assaults were met with conventional defenses, but the Tyranids quickly learned, modifying their tactics to exploit weaknesses. They were masters of infiltration. Genestealers, with their terrifying speed and rending claws, spearheaded many assaults, appearing seemingly from nowhere to rip apart command squads and breach defensive lines. More insidiously, burrowing bioforms such as Molochs and Trigons tunneled beneath the planet's surface, bypassing reinforced bunkers and emerging behind enemy lines to wreak havoc and sow panic. These subterranean attacks were particularly demoralizing, as the very ground could betray a defending force, erupting with fanged horrors. Marneus Calgar, ever at the forefront, personally led numerous counterattacks, his artificer gauntlets tearing through wave after wave of Tyranid monstrosities. His presence was a beacon of defiance, rallying his battle brothers and inspiring the beleaguered Imperial Guard. Yet, even the mightiest warriors were simply single drops in an ocean of chitin. The sheer biomass of the Tyranid forces was overwhelming. For every termagant slain, 100 more scuttled forward. For every Carnifex brought down by concentrated fire, another lumbered from the spawning pools that the Tyranids quickly established on the devastated battlefields. The air became thick with spore clouds, obscuring vision and corroding armor, while the ground ran red with blood, both alien and Imperial. The Ultramarines, fighting with a cold, righteous fury, inflicted truly staggering casualties upon Behemoth. Entire swarms were incinerated by orbital bombardments from the few remaining Imperial vessels, or blasted apart by the concentrated firepower of Predator tanks and Land Raiders. Tactical squads held impossible lines. Devastator squads unleashed hellish barrages, and veteran companies performed desperate, suicidal charges to buy precious minutes. Yet, the Tyranids simply continued their relentless advance. Their advanced bioforms, such as the towering Hive Tyrants, led the ground assaults, acting as potent psychic conduits for the hive mind and capable of tearing apart Space Marines with terrifying ease. The climactic moment of the ground war came with the defense of the Ultramarines' primary fortress monastery, a colossal edifice of adamantium and ceramite. It was here, within the very walls that had protected the chapter for millennia, that the final, desperate stand was made. Calgar, along with the most seasoned veterans of the First Company, fought inch by bloody inch against an endless tide of aliens pouring through breached defenses. The battle degenerated into brutal close-quarters combat, a swirling vortex of claws, teeth, bolter fire, and chainsword screams. The cost was truly immense. Every Ultramarine fought with the knowledge that the fate of their chapter, and perhaps the entire segmentum, rested upon their shoulders. In the end, Behemoth was repelled, but at a cost that haunts the Imperium to this day. The Ultramarines, though victorious, were grievously wounded. Many companies were reduced to mere handfuls of warriors, their ranks decimated. The planet Macragge itself bore deep, lasting scars, its northern hemisphere forever changed by the Tyranid infestation and the desperate measures taken to eradicate it. The tactical victory, achieved through unimaginable sacrifice and strategic brilliance, masked a deeper, more chilling truth. The Imperium had barely survived its first encounter with the Great Devourer. The defeat of Hive Fleet Behemoth, while a testament to the Imperium's tenacity, was not an end to the Tyranid threat, but rather a brutal, indispensable learning experience. It was the galaxy's cruel awakening. The horror of Behemoth led directly to the formation of the Ordo Xenos of the Inquisition, and the subsequent development of the Malleus Tyrannus, the doctrine and strategies specifically tailored to combat the Tyranids. Imperial scientists, xenobiologists, and strategists painstakingly studied the captured bioforms, analyzed the horrifying data from Macragge, and began to understand the true nature of this terrifying new foe. They learned of the hive mind, the synapse creatures, the terrifying adaptability, and the singular, terrifying purpose of the Tyranids: to consume all life. The lessons learned from Behemoth were written in blood and fire. The Imperium recognized that conventional warfare was insufficient. They began to develop specialized weaponry, psychic nullification techniques, and planetary defense doctrines designed to counteract the Tyranid menace. They understood that the Void War was paramount, that a Hive fleet must be destroyed before it reaches a planet's atmosphere, for once the Tyranids land, the battle is almost certainly lost. The sheer scale of the threat forced the Imperium to look outward, beyond its internal squabbles and ancient enemies, to a new existential threat from the Void. But the most chilling realization of all was that Behemoth was just the first. Its destruction sent out a psychic beacon across the intergalactic void, a signal of biomass found, consumed, and resisted. It was a call to other, even larger, more diverse hive fleets, drawing them inexorably towards the galaxy. Behemoth was merely the tip of a monstrous, unimaginable iceberg, a single ravenous maw in an endless, hungry void. The galaxy had faced its first Great Devourer, and in surviving had only marked itself for the attention of countless more. The long, dark war against the Tyranids had truly begun. The long, dark war against the Tyranids had truly begun. The initial shock of Hive Fleet Behemoth was a brutal, singular lesson. Its sheer destructive power, its overwhelming directness, had etched itself into the collective memory of the galaxy with fire and blood. Yet, the horror that followed, Hive Fleet Kraken, was to demonstrate an entirely different facet of the Great Devourer's unimaginable intellect and adaptability. If Behemoth was a monstrous battering ram, Kraken was a Hydra, 1,000 venomous serpents striking from every conceivable direction. Emerging from the galactic southeast, much like its predecessor, Kraken followed Behemoth's wake by only a few short decades. But its approach was no singular, devastating spearhead. Instead, Kraken fragmented into an unholy number of smaller, more nimble tendrils, each one a self-contained miniature hive fleet capable of independent operations. These tendrils, some no larger than a few hundred bioships, others forming vast swirling clouds of chitin and hunger, spread across the void like a rapidly metastasizing plague. They were faster, more agile, and their sheer number utterly confounded conventional defensive strategies. Imagine the Imperium's already strained astropaths and navigators, still reeling from Behemoth's direct assault, suddenly overwhelmed by reports of Tyranid incursions across vast swaths of the Segmentum Ultima. A single sector might report 3 separate tendrils, each moving on a different vector towards different targets. Worlds that had prepared for a frontal assault found themselves bypassed by smaller swarms, only to be hit from the flank or rear, their void shields unprepared, their defenses facing an unexpected vector of attack. These tendrils could bypass heavily fortified star systems, leaving them intact but isolated, while sweeping through less defended worlds, consuming them utterly before anyone could react. The sheer speed of Kraken's dispersal and its widespread devastation were unparalleled. Its tendrils were like living currents, flowing through the interstellar medium, devouring worlds and star systems with horrifying efficiency. The traditional Imperial strategy of massing fleets at choke points or establishing strongholds along anticipated invasion routes proved woefully inadequate. There was no single choke point for Kraken. There was no main fleet to destroy. Each tendril was a threat, and each tendril had to be met with a separate, often numerically inferior defensive force. This forced the Imperium into a desperate, reactive war on 1,000 fronts, stretching its already overextended military to breaking point. Entire subsectors were simply abandoned, deemed too difficult or too costly to defend, sacrificed to the relentless maw of the swarm. Among the myriad targets that Hive Fleet Kraken's tendril swept over, one stands out with particular heart-wrenching clarity: the Eldar craft world of Iyanden. The Eldar, with their far-sighted seers and ancient wisdom, had long perceived the shadow approaching from the galactic rim. They called it the Great Devourer, a force beyond mortal comprehension, a hunger that would consume all. Iyanden, once a vibrant jewel amongst the stars, a home to billions of Eldar souls, had already begun to fade. Its population had dwindled over millennia of slow decline and numerous conflicts, its domes and spires now echoing with fewer voices, the majority of its inhabitants existing as spirits enshrined within the psychic matrices of its wraithbone core. They were a people on the cusp of extinction, preserving their glorious past as best they could. Then, Kraken arrived. One of Kraken's most enormous tendrils, a swirling vortex of bioships, descended upon Iyanden's orbital spheres. The scale of the assault was apocalyptic. Hundreds of thousands of Tyranid vessels, from the smallest escorts to gargantuan hive ships, blotted out the distant stars, forming a living siege engine around the craft world. For weeks, Iyanden's few remaining living defenders, supported by their elegant, potent starfighters and void warriors, fought a desperate rearguard action in the silent, unforgiving vacuum. They inflicted grievous losses on the Xenos fleet, their courage born of the knowledge that failure meant not just death, but the utter annihilation of their ancestors' souls. Yet, the Tyranids were endless. For every bioship destroyed, 10 more emerged from the churning depths of the swarm. Eventually, the outer defenses crumbled. The Tyranids landed. Billions upon billions of ravenous creatures, from the smallest ripper to towering Carnifexes, surged across Iyanden's magnificent hull, clawing, chewing, burrowing into its very substance. The air was filled with the chittering of chitin, the psychic shriek of the hive mind, and the desperate, fading cries of the Eldar. The surviving Eldar, facing an impossible tide, were driven back into the very heart of their craft world, into the Spirit Seer's chambers, the Infinity Circuit itself. It was then, in that moment of ultimate despair, that Prince Yriel, a long-exiled hero of Iyanden, returned. He was a figure of legend, a daring corsair who had been banished for his reckless pride. But with Iyanden's doom imminent, he returned, rallying the last of Iyanden's living warriors, leading them in a suicidal counterattack. More crucially, he made a terrible, desperate gamble, one that defied all Eldar spiritual law. He commanded the awakening of the Wraithguard and Wraithlords. These were the physical manifestations of Iyanden's ancestors, powerful constructs of wraithbone, animated by the soul stones of the dead. To awaken them was to disturb the eternal peace of the departed, to force them back into the mortal coil, however briefly, to fight. It was a sacrilege, a last resort, but it was the only hope. Hundreds, then thousands of ghostly white giants, their spirit stones glowing with cold light, marched forth from their silent crypts, their D-scythes and ghost glaives tearing through the Tyranid swarms with spectral fury. The Spirit Seers, their faces etched with grief and determination, channeled their immense psychic energies to guide these spectral warriors, to give purpose to the awakened dead. Yriel himself, wielding the ancient, cursed Spear of Twilight, led the charge, a desperate, valiant stand against the seemingly infinite Tyranid tide. The battle raged for days within the very arteries of the craft world. Wraithguard were consumed, their spirit stones shattered, their ancestors' peace irrevocably lost. Living Eldar warriors fought side by side with their resurrected forebears, a spectral army of the dead fighting for the very soul of their home. In the end, a devastating orbital maneuver, risking the very integrity of the craft world, coupled with Yriel's audacious attack against the critical synapse node in the Tyranid swarm, bought Iyanden its salvation. The tendril, severely weakened and unable to adapt quickly enough, was forced to retreat, leaving behind a scarred, silent, and nearly barren husk of a world. Iyanden survived, but it was irrevocably changed. Its living population had been reduced to a mere fraction of a fraction, perhaps only a few 100,000 souls clinging to existence. The vast majority of its population now existed as the awakened dead, the Wraithguard and Wraithlords forming the backbone of its defense, silent, tireless guardians animated by the anguish of survival. It became known as the Ghost Ship, a melancholic testament to the cost of enduring the Great Devourer. It was a craft world perpetually haunted, its survival a constant, painful reminder of the sacrifices made. The lessons of Kraken, and particularly the fate of Iyanden, reverberated across the galaxy. For the Imperium, it was a profound realization that their existing defensive doctrines, largely predicated on static defenses and concentrated fleet actions, were ill-suited to combat this new threat. No longer could they rely on a single, decisive confrontation. Kraken had demonstrated a multi-headed, distributed threat that demanded an equally distributed response. This led to a painful, slow reevaluation of Imperial strategy. More emphasis began to be placed on smaller, highly mobile strike fleets capable of rapid deployment to contain emerging tendrils. Interceptor wings became more critical, tasked with breaking up Tyranid landing craft before they could disgorge their horrific payloads. Intelligence gathering on Tyranid movement became paramount, though still often futile against the unpredictable swarm. For the Eldar, it was a confirmation of their darkest fears, and a catalyst for even more desperate measures. Other species, too, felt the insidious pressure of Kraken's many tendrils, realizing that the Tyranid threat was not monolithic, but a dynamic, evolving horror. Hive Fleet Kraken, the many-headed beast, solidified the understanding that the Great Devourer was not merely a force of overwhelming numbers, but a supremely adaptable, evolving intelligence capable of shifting its tactics to exploit any perceived weakness. It taught the galaxy that survival against the Tyranids would demand not just strength, but an equally relentless and often brutal adaptability. Even with the hard-won understanding gleaned from the harrowing incursions of Behemoth and Kraken, even with the desperate evolution of Imperial strategy to meet the shifting menace of the Hive fleets, nothing, absolutely nothing, could have truly prepared the galaxy for the coming of Hive Fleet Leviathan. It arrived not as a single discernible spearhead, nor as a scattering of tendrils probing for weakness, but as an abyss made manifest, a profound, all-consuming shadow that truly earned the moniker of the Great Devourer. Leviathan was gargantuan, a cosmic entity of biological horror so vast that it redefined the scale of the Tyranid threat. Where Behemoth had been a brute force and Kraken a cunning predator, Leviathan was both, magnified to an exponential degree, and then granted a strategic genius that defied all previous assumptions about the Tyranids' capabilities. Its unique, horrifying approach was its most terrifying innovation. It did not simply advance along the galactic plane, as its predecessors had largely done, but instead enveloped segments of the galaxy from all three spatial dimensions. Imagine, if you will, looking at the galactic disk, a flat, spinning expanse of stars. Now imagine a monstrous, unseen entity reaching its countless tendrils not just across that plane, but above it and below it. Leviathan pierced the galactic plane like a colossal, multi-limbed beast, its main body remaining largely unseen, its countless tendrils spiraling inwards from the void above and below the primary concentration of stellar bodies. This rendered obsolete every established defensive line, every warp route projection, every strategic choke point that the Imperium had ever conceived. Traditional containment was a concept that simply ceased to apply. There was no front line in the conventional sense, because the enemy could emerge from sectors previously considered utterly safe, far from the established vector of attack. Worlds that believed themselves secure, nestled deep within Imperial space, suddenly found themselves under siege, outflanked by an enemy that had navigated through the interstellar void, bypassing entire sectors of the galaxy without detection until it was too late. The scale of this incursion was truly incomprehensible. Its tendrils stretched for thousands upon thousands of light years, encompassing countless star systems within its spiraling embrace. Each tendril was itself a Hive Fleet-sized entity, comprised of untold billions of bioforms, all driven by the singular, insatiable hunger of the hive mind. To speak of star systems being consumed is almost an understatement. Entire nebulae, clusters of stars, and the dark, cold spaces between them became part of Leviathan's slow, inexorable march. The sheer biomass involved was staggering, dwarfing even the combined might of Behemoth and Kraken. Astronomers and astropaths, those few who survived to relay their observations, spoke of entire swaths of the galaxy simply going dark, the light of stars gradually being extinguished, not by stellar death, but by the shroud of biomass that surrounded them, consuming everything. Leviathan's multi-pronged assault tore through two vast segmentums of the Imperium, Segmentum Pacificus and Segmentum Tempestus. These were not mere raids or skirmishes. These were tidal waves of biotic destruction, crashing against the very foundations of the Imperium. Agri-worlds, the breadbaskets of imperial might, were stripped bare in days, their ecosystems devoured, leaving behind sterile husks. Forge worlds, centuries in the making, with their intricate machinery and colossal foundries, were reduced to slag and twisted metal, their populations harvested to fuel the onward march of the swarm. Hive worlds, once teeming with quadrillions of humans, became scenes of unimaginable horror, their towering arcologies collapsing under the weight of ravenous chitin, their inhabitants consumed in a grotesque, sloshing feast. The devastation was not confined to imperial holdings. Numerous Xenos empires, some ancient and proud, others nascent and aggressive, found themselves caught in Leviathan's path. Orc warbands, usually reveling in the prospect of a good fight, were overwhelmed by sheer numbers, their ramshackle empires dissolving into chaotic feasting grounds. Eldar maiden worlds and craft world outposts, previously thought secure through their elusive tactics and potent psychic might, found themselves assaulted by an enemy that seemed to learn and adapt with terrifying speed, predicting their feints and outmaneuvering their guardians. Even the stoic Kroot, normally able to adapt and absorb the traits of their prey, were simply inundated, their enclaves collapsing under the unending wave of tooth and claw. The galaxy, for a terrifying period, became a larder, and Leviathan was the boundless maw. The psychological impact of Hive Fleet Leviathan was perhaps its most insidious weapon. It instilled an existential dread, a sense of overwhelming futility that permeated every level of imperial society. Previous Tyranid incursions had been met with fierce, if costly, resistance, with victories, however minor, offering glimmers of hope. But against Leviathan, the victories felt hollow, temporary, like bailing water from a sinking ship with a thimble. Every world saved seemed to be paid for by 10 more lost. Every tendril repelled was simply absorbed back into the greater mass, only for another, stronger one to emerge elsewhere. The very concept of fighting Leviathan seemed absurd. One could not simply defeat it. One could only delay it, perhaps at an unthinkably high cost. It was like attempting to fight the tide, or to prevent the sun from rising. The Great Devourer had arrived in its most complete, most terrifying form, and the galaxy was its meal. The Imperium, for all its colossal might, for all its billions of soldiers and fleets, found itself contemplating the unthinkable. Not just defeat, but utter annihilation. Not a glorious last stand, but a slow, agonizing consumption, until nothing remained but the cold, dead husk of a once vibrant galaxy. This was the true horror of Leviathan. It promised not just death, but eradication, the erasure of all that had ever been. The sheer, overwhelming scale and the seemingly unstoppable nature of its advance forced the Imperium to confront its own vulnerability, to stare into an abyss that truly threatened to consume all. Yet, even as the galaxy reeled beneath the suffocating shadow of the main Hive fleets, the true, insidious genius of the Tyranid method began to reveal itself in an even more fragmented, though no less devastating, form. For while Behemoth, Kraken, and Leviathan were names synonymous with epic-defining cataclysms, the actual spread of the Great Devourer was, and remains, far more decentralized. From the countless tendrils of these colossal entities, and indeed from other nascent incursions emerging from the terrifying blackness between galaxies, came the splinter fleets. These were not mere detachments, but distinct, self-sustaining entities, often specialized, always voracious, each a living, evolving weapon perfectly tailored to the destruction of whatever stood in its path. They represented the boundless adaptability of the Tyranids, a testament to their nature as the ultimate biological weapon, endlessly iterating, endlessly improving. One such terrifying offshoot was Hive Fleet Gorgon. Emerging in the galactic east, its advance was marked by an almost bewildering speed of adaptation. It encountered the Eldar, a species already ancient and adept at biological manipulation, and rather than being stymied, Gorgon's bioforms began to evolve at an unprecedented rate, often within a single engagement. Its organisms were notable for their potent, debilitating venoms and acids, their chitin shifting rapidly in color and density, often mimicking the environment or developing resistances to specific Eldar psychic attacks or weapon profiles. Worlds fell, not just to overwhelming numbers, but to bioweapons that rendered their defenders inert, paralyzed, or dissolved, before the living tide even properly engulfed them. The Gorgon's methodology was a chilling demonstration of the Tyranid's ability to counter even highly specialized and ancient foes with terrifying speed and biological precision, turning the very defenses of its prey into its own evolutionary catalyst. Further towards the galactic core, the story of Hive Fleet Jormungandr unfolded with a different kind of horror. Unlike the aerial assaults of Behemoth or the all-consuming surface waves of Kraken, Jormungandr preferred to strike from below. Its bioforms developed immense burrowing capabilities, their chitin reinforced for subterranean navigation, their sensory organs attuned to vibrations in the earth. Entire planetary defense networks, designed to repel attacks from orbit, found themselves utterly bypassed as gargantuan trigons and molochs erupted from the ground beneath fortified cities, spewing lesser organisms into the heart of command structures. Fortress worlds, considered impregnable, were gutted from within, their populations consumed before any meaningful counterattack could be mounted from above ground. The terror of Jormungandr was the terror of the unseen, the sudden, cataclysmic eruption from beneath one's feet, a subterranean nightmare that made even the most secure bastions feel like hollow shells. And then there was Naga, a splinter fleet that seemed to specialize in the crushing embrace of the void itself. While all Tyranid fleets possess void-faring capabilities, Naga's bioships were honed for interstellar combat with a chilling efficiency. Its squadrons were more nimble, its weapons optimized for engaging and dismantling enemy fleets in the cold vacuum. It would hunt down fleeing convoys, isolate strategic systems by eliminating their naval defenses, and effectively starve worlds of aid before the ground invasion even began. One might trace its lineage to a segment of Kraken that encountered exceptional void resistance, or perhaps even an early Leviathan tendril that diverged, honing its methods against the heavily defended warplanes of the Imperium. Naga proved that even a single void battle group, comprised of cunningly evolved Tyranid vessels, could bring a prosperous system to its knees through attrition and terror alone, turning the vast emptiness of space into a hunting ground. The very name Hydra speaks of endless proliferation, and Hive Fleet Hydra embodies this unsettling concept. Unlike fleets with distinct specializations, Hydra's primary method appears to be sheer, unrelenting numbers and an almost self-replicating nature. It is not just one fleet, but an ever-multiplying constellation of smaller incursions, each capable of splitting again upon encountering significant resistance or opportunity. It floods systems with bioforms, overwhelms defenses through attrition, and, should a segment be defeated, two more seem to emerge from the consumed biomass or from the dark spaces beyond. This makes Hydra an exceptionally difficult foe to truly eradicate, for its tendrils are everywhere, a constant, nagging pressure. 1,000 small cuts rather than one single crushing blow, slowly bleeding the Imperium dry across vast swaths of the Segmentum Ultima and beyond. Its presence is a constant low hum of fear, a relentless pressure that drains resources and hope. Hive Fleet Dagon, on the other hand, often operated with a more insidious, almost mythic quality. Reports of Dagon's incursions frequently came from the deep void, from isolated systems far from established warp routes, or from worlds considered lost to ancient astronomical phenomenon. Its bioforms were sometimes described as possessing an unusual resilience to cosmic radiation, or an affinity for the crushing pressures of gas giant atmospheres. It seemed to prefer the slow, methodical consumption of worlds that had little hope of external aid, slipping through the vast emptiness of interarm space to devour its prey undisturbed, leaving only empty, barren husks behind. Its attacks were less about a grand, visible assault and more about the quiet, terrifying disappearance of entire systems from the Imperium's astropathic charts, a silent, cosmic hunter devouring its unsuspecting prey. Hive Fleet Tiamat presented a different kind of horror entirely. Rather than immediate, violent consumption, Tiamat seemed to possess a deeper, more profound purpose: the transformation of worlds. Its unique symbiont forms would descend upon planets and begin an accelerated process of bioforming, reshaping the very crust and atmosphere into a vast, living Tyranid ecosystem. Gigantic organic structures would erupt from the ground, drawing nutrients from the planetary core, creating breeding pools and consumption conduits on a colossal scale. These worlds became seed worlds, vast living foundries from which further Tyranid bioforms could be spawned and launched, effectively turning the planet itself into a weapon. The battle for Tiamat's consumed worlds was not merely a battle for survival, but a desperate race to prevent the irreversible biological conversion of a celestial body into a living part of the Great Devourer, a truly alien and horrifying metamorphosis. Then there was Skyla, a splinter fleet that showed a disturbing preference for ocean worlds, or planets with significant hydrospheres. Its bioforms evolved specialized aquatic adaptations, from immense, deep-sea predators that could overwhelm void-faring vessels on the surface, to smaller, incredibly agile forms that swarmed coastal defenses. Naval installations, once thought impervious to anything but orbital bombardment, found themselves assailed from below, their underwater defenses rendered useless against the sheer biological ingenuity of Skyla's swarms. The terror of Skyla was the depths themselves, the vast, unexplored oceans becoming teeming, hungry maw worlds, their crushing pressures and abyssal darkness transformed into an instrument of consumption. Hive Fleet Medusa, much like its mythical namesake, brought with it a chilling emphasis on biological paralysis and incapacitation. Its vanguard bioforms often released aerosolized toxins or deployed specialized venoms that didn't necessarily kill immediately, but instead induced profound states of petrification, paralysis, or catatonic stupor in their victims. Defenders would find their limbs seizing, their minds clouded, their very will to fight dissolving into primal fear before the actual consumption began. This systematic debilitating of resistance prior to the main assault allowed Medusa to conserve its biomass, ensuring that its targets were right for assimilation with minimal expenditure of Tyranid resources. It was a subtle, yet utterly horrifying approach to warfare, turning the very biological processes of its prey against them, leaving worlds full of living but utterly helpless sustenance. And finally, there is Ouroboros, a splinter fleet whose movements confounded Imperial strategists for decades.
Unlike other fleets that pressed ever onward, Ouroboros seemed to loop back upon itself, appearing to re-emerge from previously consumed or devastated areas. This cyclical pattern hinted at an unnerving long-term strategy, perhaps involving dormant spore colonies or a capacity to lie low in the dark between systems for extended periods, waiting for opportunities to manifest anew. It suggested a fleet capable of remarkable patience, or perhaps one that consciously revisited areas to pick clean any lingering biomass, or to counter any attempts at recolonization. Ouroboros was a phantom, an echo of the Great Devourer that refused to stay defeated, constantly reminding the Imperium that even a cleansed sector could suddenly become a new front in the endless war. These named splinter fleets are but a few examples among hundreds, perhaps thousands, of similar, smaller incursions that plague the galaxy. They are the innumerable teeth of the Great Devourer, each one capable of inflicting grievous wounds, each one adapting, learning, and spreading the Tyranid menace ever wider. They complicate Imperial defense immeasurably, for while the bulk of the Imperium's might must be arrayed against the main Hive fleets, these smaller, specialized threats demand constant vigilance, diverting precious resources and attention. The galaxy is not merely facing 3 grand invasions, it is being consumed by an infinite Hydra, its heads appearing and multiplying, ensuring that no corner of the cosmos is truly safe from the hungering void.
Among these myriad threats, however, one conflict stands apart. A cataclysm on such a scale that it defines an entire quadrant of the galaxy. A monstrous, self-sustaining war unlike any other witnessed by Imperial scholars. This is the Octarius War, a grinding, brutal maelstrom of destruction born from the unlikely collision of 2 of the galaxy's most voracious Xenos empires. For centuries, the galactic south had been a cauldron of green. The Orc Empire of Octarius was not merely a collection of scattered wogs. It was a colossal, burgeoning realm, a sprawling, anarchic confederation of warbands and crumping crews, swelling like a grotesque fungal bloom across hundreds of systems. Its primary architect was the legendary war boss Ghazghkull Thraka himself, who, long before his current galaxy-spanning rampage, had left Octarius as a fertile breeding ground for his kind, a testing ground for his theories of perpetual, glorious war. The Orcs of Octarius were fierce, numerous, and constantly evolving through their incessant infighting and conquest of lesser species. Their ramshackle empire sprawled, consuming resources, churning out new mechs, new knobs, new vehicles, all driven by the simple, undeniable desire for a bigger, better fight. To the Imperium, Octarius was a virulent green plague, contained only by the sheer logistics of its distance and the even greater horrors lurking in other corners of the void. Then came Hive Fleet Leviathan. This colossal tendril of the Great Devourer, pushing inexorably through the galactic south and west, did not simply skirt the Octarius Empire.
It plunged directly into its heart, drawn by the immense psychic clamor of billions upon billions of warring orcs, a siren song of boundless biomass and kinetic energy that promised an unimaginable feast. The initial planetary landings were cataclysmic, as they always are. Spore clouds choked the atmosphere, bioforms boiled from ruptured sack ships, and the silent, hungry tides of chitin and claw began their work of consumption. But these were no ordinary worlds, populated by cowering humans or disorganized xenos. These were orc worlds, hardened by endless battle, saturated with spores, and teeming with millions of greenskins whose very existence was predicated on fighting. The conflict that ensued was unprecedented. It was not merely a battle, it was a biological and martial feedback loop on a scale that beggars the imagination. The Tyranids, true to their nature, descended to consume. But the orcs, true to their nature, met them with a joyous, unyielding ferocity. For the greenskins, this was the ultimate Wa, an enemy perfectly designed for their love of destruction. The fighting was immediate, constant, and utterly apocalyptic. Planets became charnel bits, moons were carved into hollowed-out weapon platforms, and star systems glowed with the furious energies of orbital combat and groundside detonations. What made the Octarius War so distinct, so uniquely horrifying, was its self-sustaining nature. The Tyranids fed on the biomass of the defeated orcs, growing larger, spawning new broods, adapting their forms with terrifying speed to counter the crude yet effective orc weaponry and their overwhelming numbers. Every consumed orc added to the hive mind's knowledge, every genetic strand absorbed, contributing to a monstrous library of lethal adaptations. They developed thicker carapaces to shrug off orc shoot-a-fire, specialized bioacids to dissolve fungal growths, and terrifying new strains of bioforms designed to pierce the armor of orc gargants or hunt down powerful war bosses. Simultaneously, the orcs, thriving on the perpetual conflict, only grew stronger. Their Wa energy, a psychic field generated by their collective belief and love of fighting, swelled to gargantuan proportions. Defeated orcs release spores, rapidly growing into new generations of greenskins, eager to join the fray. Surviving orcs grew bigger, tougher, and ever more inventive. Their mechs, under the pressure of constant Tyranid adaptation, concocted ever more outlandish and destructive weaponry, gribbly destroying ray guns, more resilient stompas, and faster, more brutal rocket buggies. Knobs became monstrous brutes, their muscles engorged by constant combat, their crude armor adorned with Tyranid carapaces. The cycle was vicious. Tyranids consumed orcs, evolved, and produced more Tyranids. Orcs fought Tyranids, grew stronger, and produced more orcs. It was an ecological nightmare, a perpetual motion machine of death and rebirth for two species whose very existence revolved around consuming or conquering. For the Imperium, Octarius presented a chilling strategic conundrum. Initially, the conflict was seen, paradoxically, as a kind of salvation. Here were two of the galaxy's most dangerous Xenos threats, locked in a mutually destructive embrace, consuming vast swaths of the galactic rim and diverting their destructive attention away from Imperial worlds. It bought precious time, relieving pressure on overstretched defense fleets and allowing resources to be focused on other critical fronts. The Octarius sector became a colossal safe zone by proxy, a bulwark of carnage keeping the worst of Leviathan and the Octarian War from spilling into Imperial territory. It was a cold, calculated relief, the horror of Xenos annihilation somehow preferable to the alternative. Yet, this safe zone was simultaneously a crucible, a horrific forge where unimaginable power was being tempered. The long-term implications were terrifyingly clear. Whoever emerged victorious from Octarius would be an inconceivably more dangerous foe. Imagine a Tyranid strain perfected over centuries of battling the orcs, with natural defenses against their Wa energy, forms capable of tearing apart even the largest orc constructs, and a collective intelligence that had learned every trick and tactic of the greenskins. Such a hive fleet would be virtually unstoppable, possessing a genetic memory of fighting and overcoming the galaxy's most warlike race. Conversely, consider the horror of an orc empire that had vanquished the Tyranids. An orc race that had learned how to fight, defeat, and even, perhaps, consume the Great Devourer.
Their technology would be uniquely suited to anti-Tyranid warfare, their numbers bolstered beyond reckoning by the endless conflict. Their Wa energy vibrating with a density and power previously unknown. Such an orc force would be a green tide of cosmic scale, an unstoppable juggernaut that had proven its mettle against the ultimate predator, ready to turn its destructive gaze upon the Imperium. The strategic choice for the Imperium was a horrifying one. To intervene would be to commit countless Imperial Guard regiments, fleets of battlecruisers, and perhaps even Astartes chapters into the maw of this conflict. This would not only be a monumental drain on resources, but would also risk tipping the scales, inadvertently empowering whichever side the Imperium chose not to focus its attacks on. If Imperial forces attacked the Tyranids, the Orcs would undoubtedly be strengthened, potentially emerging victorious faster. If they attempted to fight both, they risked being consumed entirely, throwing good men and material into an unwinnable, unending meat grinder. The only viable strategy seemed to be containment, erecting vast defensive bulwarks on the fringes of the Octarius sector, pouring resources into fortification and constant vigilance, hoping to prevent the inevitable victor from spilling out into the galaxy. And so the Octarius War rages on, a monument to the endless, self-consuming horror of the 41st millennium.
It is a slow, grinding apocalypse, a spectacle of cosmic devastation that continues to redefine the boundaries of warfare. Empires rise and fall within its maelstrom. Untold billions of lives are extinguished and reborn, all within the confines of a galactic region dedicated entirely to the art of mutual destruction. Its ultimate conclusion remains one of the greatest and perhaps most terrifying unknowns of the age. A ticking time bomb whose detonation promises to shake the very foundations of the Imperium itself. Yet, even as the Octarius War raged, a more profound, galaxy-spanning cataclysm began to unfold, dwarfing even that protracted horror in its immediate and devastating impact. The Great Rift. This galactic wound, the cicatrix maledictum, tore through the very fabric of reality, bisecting the Imperium and plunging countless star systems into an age of darkness and unreason. It was not merely a warp storm, but a psychic scream made manifest, an aperture through which the raw, unfiltered madness of the Immaterium bled into the material universe. For most, it was an insurmountable barrier, a region of such terrifying psychic turbulence and spatial distortion that navigation became impossible, and even thought itself a perilous act. Astrophabic communications collapsed into static and agony. Fleets were lost without a trace, and entire sectors were rendered utterly isolated, left to fend for themselves against the horrors that now poured from the warp's maw. One might imagine that such a monumental upheaval would provide a respite from the Tyranid threat, that the vast swirling chaos of the rift would repel or destroy the Hive fleets, denying them passage. Indeed, in many instances, this proved to be true. Hive fleet tendrils, caught in the outermost fringes of the cicatrix maledictum, have been observed breaking apart, their smaller swarms scattering into the void, or their larger vessels simply vanishing into the roiling energies, presumably consumed or cast into some unfathomable dimension. The very synchronicity of the synapse web, that psychic unity binding all Tyranid organisms, relies on a relatively stable psychic medium. The Great Rift, in its sheer, deafening psychic cacophony, could shatter this connection, leaving individual swarms rudderless, driven by pure, unthinking instinct until they too are overwhelmed. However, the Tyranids are not merely a force of brute strength. They are the ultimate adapters, an evolutionary engine without peer. For every tendril lost, another seems to find a way. The very chaos of the cicatrix maledictum, while a barrier, also created new, unpredictable pathways. Like debris caught in a maelstrom, some Hive fleet elements were inadvertently shunted through pockets of the less turbulent warp, spat out into previously secure sectors far from the known Tyranid incursions. These were not grand, coordinated invasions, but rather isolated, desperate incursions. Imagine, if you will, the sudden, horrifying appearance of a Tyranid vanguard emerging from a localized warp rift above a peaceful agri-world. A vanguard that seems to possess no grand strategy beyond the immediate, ravenous consumption of all life. Cut off from the larger hive mind, their synaptic links stretched thin or completely severed, these swarms act with a primal, almost frenzied desperation, their attacks swift, brutal, and utterly without remorse. They are like starving predators, striking at anything they can reach, their actions less tactical and more a pure expression of their insatiable hunger. Furthermore, the Great Rift has obscured vast swaths of the galaxy, turning distant stars into dim, flickering coasts, and rendering accurate astropathic prediction all but impossible. This offers the Tyranids a terrifying advantage. Under the cover of the galactic turmoil, with Imperial watchposts overwhelmed by warp incursions and communications crippled, Hive fleets can advance with an unprecedented degree of stealth. Their shadow in the warp, that psychic null field that presses down upon the minds of all sentient beings, now operates within a much broader field of ambient psychic noise and distortion. It becomes harder to distinguish the familiar, chilling dread of the Tyranids from the general, all-encompassing terror of the Great Rift itself. They are but one horror amongst many, and in that multitude, they find new opportunities to strike unseen, unheard, until their fangs are already upon the throat of an unsuspecting world. And then there is the chilling possibility of adaptation. The Tyranids are defined by their ability to evolve, to incorporate the genetic strengths of their prey, and to overcome any obstacle. The Great Rift presents an environment of unparalleled psychic pressure, a constant bombardment of raw, unreasoning warp energy. One might speculate, with a shiver of dread, that the Hive fleets are not merely enduring this psychic maelstrom, but are actively adapting to it. Perhaps new bioforms are arising, or subtle changes are occurring within the existing Tyranid strains, granting them an increased resilience to warp energies. Imagine creatures that are not merely resistant to psychic attacks, but somehow absorb or even redirect the raw power of the Imperium. It is a terrifying thought that the very fabric of reality tearing apart could serve as an evolutionary crucible for the galaxy's most relentless predator. It is even conceivable, though this remains pure conjecture from our current vantage, that the Tyranids might begin to leverage the increased warp presence. The shadow in the warp is already a form of psychic manipulation, a dampening field. Could, in some horrifying future, certain Tyranid organisms evolve to project localized zones of stability within the warp, creating temporary, albeit treacherous, corridors for their fleets? Or perhaps, could they develop a means to interact with the warp's chaotic currents, using them as a bizarre, unpredictable form of FTL travel, shunting themselves across vast distances in unforeseen surges of warp energy? The thought of a Tyranid fleet not merely hindered by the warp, but somehow using its madness, is a concept that chills even the most hardened scholars of the Xenos. This could manifest as new synaptic creatures capable of generating subtle, reality-warping fields that disrupt Imperial defenses, or even new strains of Norn queens capable of guiding their tendrils through the most turbulent zones of the rift, emerging from the darkness with grotesque, mutated forms that reflect the horrors they have endured and conquered. The galaxy, already broken, might find its very pathways of survival twisted into conduits for its ultimate doom. The Great Rift has plunged the Imperium into an age of unparalleled despair and urgency. The vast, organized might of the Imperium is now fractured, isolated, and overwhelmed. Communications are unreliable, supply lines are shattered, and coordinated defense is a logistical nightmare. Into this chaos, the Tyranids arrive as an unceasing force of consumption, appearing from unexpected directions, their hunger now seemingly amplified by the galactic convulsion.
The Imperium faces not merely a two-front war, but a war on every front imaginable, simultaneously battling the endless hordes of chaos pouring from the rift, contending with resurgent Xenos empires, and wrestling with its own internal strife. Yet, beneath it all, the Tyranid threat persists, unchanging in its ultimate goal. Only now it is rendered more insidious, more unpredictable, and infinitely more terrifying by the very breakdown of reality itself. The galaxy no longer knows where the next swarm will appear from, only that it will appear, drawn by the psychic distress and the sheer abundance of life left vulnerable in the shattered Imperium. The long, slow creep of consumption has become a frantic, fragmented assault, a relentless, evolving horror against a realm already brought to its knees. The very essence of this evolving horror lies within the swarm itself, in its myriad bioforms, each an exquisitely engineered instrument of consumption and destruction. The Tyranids are not merely a collection of monstrous beasts. They are a living, learning, and terrifyingly adaptive superorganism. Their evolution is a relentless, accelerating process, driven by the hive mind's insatiable hunger and its singular, unwavering goal, the perfect, efficient assimilation of all biological material. Every encounter, every defeat, every fleeting victory against them only serves to refine their forms, to hone their weapons, to specialize their terrifying role within the greater swarm. From the moment a new hive fleet is detected, or even before it breaches the outer systems, the signs of this biological progression become chillingly apparent. Often, the first insidious whispers of the swarm are not the roaring guns of its larger bioconstructs, but the creeping dread brought by the Genestealers. These are the vanguard, the insidious parasites that infiltrate worlds decades, sometimes centuries, before the main fleet arrives. They are stealthy, powerful, and utterly terrifying, their 4 powerful limbs ending in razor-sharp claws, their chitinous carapaces proof against all but the heaviest small arms fodder. Their most horrifying weapon, however, is not their physical might, but their ability to subvert and reproduce. A single Genestealer can infect a world, planting its genetic seed, slowly building a cult dedicated to the arrival of their star children. These cults, known chillingly as Genestealer Cults, fester within the underbellies of imperial society, spreading like a disease, their adherents unknowingly or fanatically preparing the way for the doom to come. They sabotage defenses, spread disinformation, and rise in open rebellion at the most opportune moment, tearing the heart out of a world's resistance from within, just as the fleet descends. They are the psychological weapon, the architects of internal collapse, ensuring the feast begins with minimal effort. As the shadow of the main fleet begins to fall upon a system, other insidious vanguard organisms begin their work. The Lictors, spectral hunters that move with an unnerving silence, are often observed next. These creatures are the Tyranids' foremost infiltrators and terror weapons, masters of camouflage and psychic disorientation. Their elongated, blade-like forelimbs allow them to scuttle across any surface, their chameleonic skin adapting to the surrounding environment with breathtaking speed. But it is their sensory organs, arrayed in feathery plumes upon their heads, that make them truly horrifying. They can taste the air for pheromones, detect the minutest vibrations, and even perceive the psychic emanations of their prey.
Lictors stalk the command structures, the strategic centers, the vital conduits of a world's defense, eliminating key personnel and sowing panic, disrupting communications and command chains.
They are the harbingers of dread, often leaving behind a trail of flayed, still warm bodies, a gruesome message for those who remain. Once the initial disruption is achieved, the true tide of the swarm is unleashed. The countless, chittering hordes of Jormungandrs and Termagants form the bulk of any Tyranid invasion. These are the swarms, the living waves that overwhelm defenses through sheer, unimaginable numbers. Jormungandrs are pure melee shock troops, their scything talons and razor-sharp claws allowing them to tear through infantry and light vehicles with terrifying efficiency. They move with an unnatural speed, leaping and bounding, utterly focused on closing the distance and engaging in a frenzy of close-quarters combat. Termagants, conversely, are the ranged element, typically armed with bioorganic weaponry such as flesh borers, devourers, or spine fists, spitting torrents of living ammunition at their foes. Both are considered expendable by the hive mind, their lives insignificant compared to the consumption of the world. They exist to overwhelm, to drag down, to distract, allowing the larger, more specialized bioforms to execute their strategic roles. Yet, their simplicity is their strength, a truly endless, self-replicating flood that can drown entire armies. Above the swarms, organizing their movements and relaying the will of the hive mind, are the Tyranid warriors. These are the backbone of the swarm, often the first truly intelligent bioforms encountered in battle, serving as synaptic nodes that extend the hive mind's control to lesser creatures.
Warriors are considerably larger and tougher than the Gaunts, their heavy, chitinous plating able to shrug off much small arms fire. They are terrifyingly adaptable, capable of bearing a wide array of bioweaponry, from venom cannons to bone swords, allowing them to fill various combat roles, from heavy support to close-quarters specialists. Each warrior is a potent threat in its own right, but their true terror lies in their synaptic link. Severing it can cause nearby lesser creatures to descend into a confused, atavistic frenzy, temporarily disrupting the swarm's tactical cohesion. As the battle intensifies and the defenses begin to crumble, the truly monstrous engines of destruction are brought to bear. The Carnifexes, often called Screaming Killers or Bio-Titans by Imperial forces, are living battering rams. These gargantuan creatures are nigh indestructible, their mountainous forms covered in layers of hardened chitin, capable of weathering immense punishment. They charge through enemy lines, crushing vehicles, smashing bunkers, and tearing apart entire formations with their colossal crushing claws or massive biocannons. Each Carnifex is a force of nature, an unstoppable juggernaut designed to break the strongest fortifications and overwhelm the heaviest resistance. They embody the raw, brute force of the Tyranid invasion, a primal terror that shatters morale as much as it shatters physical defenses. Towering above even the Carnifexes, embodying the strategic genius and psychic might of the hive mind, are the Hive Tyrants. These are the undisputed commanders of the local swarm, the direct manifestations of the hive mind's will on the battlefield.
Hive Tyrants are incredibly potent psychic organisms, capable of unleashing devastating psychic attacks, bending the wills of lesser creatures, and shielding their brethren with powerful psychic barriers. They can be found in various forms: massive, bipedal walking beasts, or winged terrors soaring through the skies, raining death from above. Each is equipped with a devastating array of bioweaponry, from potent venom cannons to shimmering bone swords, making them unparalleled combatants. They are the crucial synaptic linchpins, their presence ensuring the swarm operates with brutal efficiency and tactical acumen. Eliminating a Hive Tyrant often sends ripples of disarray through the surrounding Tyranid forces, a testament to their critical role. Yet, this biological diversity is not static. Each Hive Fleet, and indeed each Splinter Fleet, refines and specializes these core creatures, adapting them to specific environmental challenges or enemy tactics. Hive Fleet Behemoth, for instance, emphasized pure brute force, producing massive, heavily armored bioforms designed for direct, overwhelming assaults. Its Carnifexes were legendary for their sheer toughness. Hive Fleet Kraken, on the other hand, specialized in speed and flanking maneuvers. Its Lictors and Jormungandrs becoming notoriously fast and agile, capable of outmaneuvering even the most disciplined Imperial defenders. Hive Fleet Leviathan, the largest and most sprawling, has shown an unnerving psychic resilience and an ability to adapt its physiology to counter almost any threat, evolving specialized anti-psyker organisms or creating new strains with hardened defenses against particular weapon types. There are whispered accounts, perhaps apocryphal, of unique bioforms spawned to counter specific Necron constructs or Elderly war engines, appearing for only a single conflict before being reabsorbed and their genetic material incorporated into the evolving whole. The chilling truth is that the Tyranids possess a genetic memory, a vast biological library constantly updated with every scrap of assimilated biomass. When a planet is consumed, not only is its matter broken down and its energy harvested, but its very genetic essence is analyzed. Strengths are identified, weaknesses are cataloged, and new adaptations are forged in the unseen biomass processors deep within the Hive Fleet's gargantuan ships. The hive mind learns. It remembers. It seeks not just consumption, but perfection. It is a relentless evolutionary arms race where the Tyranids hold every advantage, constantly experimenting, constantly refining, turning every foe's strength into a potential adaptation for their own monstrous forms. This horrifying, relentless drive for genetic perfection and consumption underpins all Tyranid evolution, making them an ever-changing, utterly unpredictable, and ultimately unstoppable foe, driven by a hunger that transcends mere sustenance, a hunger for universal biomass, for the very fabric of life itself. The Imperium, facing a foe that seeks not conquest but utter consumption, a foe that learns and adapts with horrifying speed, has been forced to devise strategies that are themselves born of desperation and an unimaginable willingness to sacrifice. To deny the Great Devourer its sustenance, to starve the ravenous fleets, is the ultimate goal, but the methods employed are often as grim as the enemy itself. Perhaps the most infamous and devastating of these strategies is Exterminatus. when a world is irrevocably overrun, when its defense is deemed impossible, or when the risk of the Tyranid biomass being fully assimilated becomes too great, the chilling order is given. Planet-killing cyclonic torpedoes or atmospheric contagions are unleashed, not merely to defeat the foe, but to utterly obliterate the planet itself, transforming it into a sterile, lifeless husk. It is a terrible calculus, sacrificing billions of souls, centuries of history, and invaluable resources, all to deny the Tyranids even a single atom of usable genetic material. The act of Exterminatus against the Tyranids is a brutal recognition that even the most cherished imperial world, teeming with life, is less important than preventing the growth of an even greater monstrousness. Every such act scars the Imperium, leaving a festering wound of lost humanity and wasted potential, yet it is a wound willingly inflicted to prevent an even deeper, more terminal infection. The very air around such worlds, long after the fires have died and the vacuum has claimed its silent reign, seems to whisper of the screams of the dying, a perpetual reminder of the price of survival. Beyond the ultimate horror of planetary destruction, the Imperium also employs a scorched earth policy on a scale that defies easy comprehension. Worlds in the path of a Hive fleet are stripped bare. If time and resources permit, populations are evacuated, though this is a monumental task, often only partially successful, leaving countless millions to face the Tyranid onslaught alone. Factories are razed, food stores incinerated, water supplies poisoned, and all flora and fauna systematically purged where possible. Every resource that could fuel the Tyranid's biological war machine is destroyed. Forests are set ablaze, oceans are contaminated with potent chemicals, mineral veins are collapsed with seismic charges. The goal is to present the Hive Fleet with a barren rock, a husk devoid of life, a world not worth the expenditure of its precious enzymatic acids and assimilation pools. This often transforms verdant, thriving planets into blighted wastelands before the Tyranids even arrive, a bitter victory that leaves behind only ruin, a sacrifice of the planet's ecological future for the fleeting hope of staving off the cosmic horror. The loyalty and sheer tenacity of Imperial Guard regiments tasked with these grim preparations, and then, often, with holding the line until the last possible moment, are testament to the indoctrination and desperate courage demanded by this war. They burn their own homes, poison their own wells, and then die defending the resulting desolation. The first line of defense, however, always begins in the void. Imperial battle fleets, mighty and formidable against any conventional foe, find themselves engaged in a losing struggle against the organic monstrosities that are Tyranid hive ships. These living vessels are terrifying to behold. Colossal bioconstructs, bristling with chitinous weaponry, capable of withstanding punishment that would shatter ceramite and adamantium. They move with an unnatural speed, guided by the cold, alien intellect of the hive mind, often outmaneuvering even the swiftest Imperial cruisers. Void battles against the Tyranids are not wars of attrition in the traditional sense, but desperate struggles against a tide that reforms itself even as it breaks. Imperial vessels are equipped with lances that can shear through starship armor, and nova cannons that unleash sun-like eruptions. Yet these weapons often find themselves absorbed by thick biochitin, or their explosions are simply ignored by the sheer mass of the Tyranid fleet.
Hundreds of small, agile attack craft, Tyranid swarm organisms, harry Imperial vessels, gnawing at their shields and hulls, while larger cruisers like Heralds of the Hive Mind, or even gargantuan battleships like the Hive ships themselves, simply shrug off broadsides. The Imperial Navy's strategies are simple. Concentrated fire on the largest bioships, desperate ramming maneuvers, and the liberal deployment of cyclonic torpedoes in an attempt to break the sheer numerical superiority of the Xenos. Often, the ultimate goal is not victory, but delay. To slow the Hive Fleet, to disrupt its orbital digestion processes, to buy precious hours or days for ground forces to prepare or for evacuations to complete. These void engagements are costly beyond measure.
Entire battle fleets are sacrificed, their crews dying, gasping in vacuum, their ships torn apart by living claws or corroded by torrents of acidic biological matter. The silence that follows such engagements, punctuated only by the distant, dying screams of tortured metal and the eerie organic creak of Tyranid vessels, is perhaps the truest testament to the horror of their passing. Yet, time and again, Imperial admirals, knowing full well the likely outcome, send their fleets into the maw, for the alternative is the swift, total annihilation of entire star systems. On the ground, the war against the Tyranids is an unending nightmare of teeth, claws, and biomass. Every world that faces a full-scale Tyranid invasion becomes a charnel house. Imperial Guard regiments, often numbering in the millions on a single world, are deployed in defensive lines that stretch for thousands of kilometers, attempting to establish kill zones or deny strategic resources. Their tactics are often brutal and direct: massed artillery bombardments, concentrated lascon fire, and desperate bayonet charges into the churning, multi-limb tide. Even against the smallest Tyranid organisms, like the ravenous Jormungandrs or the resilient termagants, the sheer numbers are overwhelming. Against larger, more formidable bioforms, the monstrous Carnifexes, the synapse-controlling warriors, or the terrifying Hive Tyrants, the Guard relies on specialized anti-tank weaponry, heavy flamers, and the steadfast devotion of their commissars. Countless smaller, heroic, and often tragic last stands dot the bloody annals of the Tyranid wars. Entire garrisons holding a single power generator against the tidal wave of Chiton, buying hours for a final evacuation shuttle. Planetary defense forces, armed with little more than autoguns and courage, forming a desperate perimeter around the collapsing Hive City. Mechanicus fabricator generals self-destructing their precious forge worlds rather than let their arcane technologies fall into Tyranid hands, ensuring only a sterile waste of melted metal and shattered rock for the hive mind. Each of these moments represents an individual act of immense bravery, a testament to the human spirit's refusal to yield even in the face of absolute despair. These aren't the grand celebrated victories of Space Marine chapters, but the anonymous, forgotten sacrifices of billions. The names of these worlds, the faces of these martyrs, are swallowed by the vastness of the Imperium's suffering. Yet their defiance echoes through the void. Space Marine chapters too make their stands, though their deployments are often more surgical, more precise. A chapter might strike at the heart of a Tyranid invasion, targeting a Hive Tyrant to disrupt the synapse network, or spearhead a desperate evacuation to save a critical population. Chapters like the Ultramarines, the Blood Angels, and the Scythes of the Emperor have all faced the Great Devourer, sometimes to near extinction. The Scythes of the Emperor, for instance, were almost completely annihilated defending their homeworld of Sotha from Hive Fleet Kraken, their numbers reduced to a precious few, their chapter planet consumed.
Their sacrifice, however, bought critical time for other systems to prepare, a pattern repeated countless times across the galaxy. Space Marine chapters represent the very pinnacle of Imperial might, yet even their superhuman strength and tactical brilliance are often not enough to halt the tide, merely to channel it, to redirect it, or to buy a little more time. They are the shield, but a shield that is constantly battered, cracked, and reformed. The sacrifices demanded by this war are truly immense. Billions upon billions of lives are lost with each passing Hive Fleet. Entire cultures erased from existence. Entire star systems rendered barren. The resources of the Imperium, already stretched thin across 1 million fronts, are depleted at an alarming rate. Shipyards work ceaselessly to replace lost vessels. Forge worlds churn out weaponry at unsustainable rates, and new regiments are levied from worlds often too poor to spare their sons and daughters. This is a war of attrition on a cosmic scale, where the Imperium gives everything it has, and the Tyranids simply keep coming, their numbers seemingly endless, their hunger insatiable. The grim, attritional nature of the war against the Great Devourer means that even victories are often Pyrrhic. A Hive Fleet might be repelled, but at the cost of multiple worlds, entire battle fleets, and populations numbering in the trillions. The galaxy is left scarred, impoverished, and forever changed. The ecosystems of consumed worlds are gone forever, their unique genetic legacies assimilated. Even worlds that survive often do so as broken husks, their populations decimated, their infrastructure shattered, their future uncertain. The memory of the Tyranid invasion lingers like a phantom limb, a constant, nagging ache in the collective psyche of the Imperium. Every engagement, whether in the void or on a desolate planet, adds another layer to this chilling saga of survival, a testament to a desperate struggle against an enemy that sees all life as mere fodder, all worlds as nothing more than biomass to be consumed. It is a slow, agonizing process of loss, where every inch gained is paid for in blood, and every respite is merely a moment before the next inevitable wave of hungry alien horror descends. The Imperium does not seek to defeat the Tyranids, not truly, for that seems an impossible dream. It seeks merely to survive, to endure, to delay the inevitable for as long as possible, clinging to the flickering flame of humanity in an ever-darkening cosmos. But the truly chilling reality, the truth that gnaws at the edges of every commander's strategy and every citizen's prayer, is that all of these terrible incursions, every Hive Fleet named and numbered, every world lost, and every desperate victory won, represents only a fraction, a mere tendril, a probing claw, of the true horror that lurks beyond the galactic rim. What has thus far entered the Milky Way? What has brought some of the most powerful empires to their knees and reshaped the very stars is but the vanguard, the scout force, the first hungry wave. Beyond the shimmering veil of the galaxy's edge, in the unimaginable void between star clusters, lies the true Great Devourer. It is a mass of biomorphic fleets and colossal organisms so vast that it defies all attempts at measurement or comprehension.
Astronomical observations made by dying star fortresses or deep space probes before they too went silent hint at an approaching shadow that blots out entire constellations, a seemingly endless ocean of organic spacecraft and creatures that stretches further than the eye can see, further than even the most powerful telescopes can resolve. It is a cosmic entity of incomprehensible scale, moving with an inexorable slowness that belies its terrifying momentum, a hunger given physical form, advancing across the galactic void. The scale of this unrevealed force is perhaps the most terrifying aspect of the Tyranid threat. Imagine, if you will, the combined biomass of every living thing in the Segmentum Pacificus, every beast, every plant, every human. Now multiply that by 1,000, now 1,000,000. Now try to conceive of a number so vast it breaks the mind, and you might begin to approach the true measure of the Tyranids that have yet to fully turn their gaze upon our galaxy. Each individual organism within this abyssal horde, from the smallest ripper to the largest hive ship, is merely a cell in a hyperorganism of unparalleled size, all driven by the singular, unthinking will of the hive mind. It is an approaching ecosystem, a mobile super predator that has consumed all other life it has encountered and now turns its attention to the ripe, vibrant biomass of the Milky Way. The ultimate goal of the Tyranids, if such a rudimentary term can even be applied to a biological imperative, is absolute and total consumption. It is not merely to destroy, nor to conquer, but to completely assimilate. Every world they touch is stripped bare, not just of its cities and its peoples, but of its very atmosphere, its oceans, its geological nutrients. The oceans are drunk, the atmosphere devoured, the crust of the planet scraped clean by digestion pools and bioconstructs until nothing remains but a barren, lifeless rock. All biomass, all genetic information, every molecule of organic matter is converted into new Tyranid organisms, adding to the endless swarm, enriching the genetic library of the hive mind. The galaxy in their wake would become a lifeless husk, a silent testament to a hunger that knows no satiation. The thought whispers through the minds of savants and heretics alike. What then? What happens when an entire galaxy has been consumed, converted, and assimilated? Does the Great Devourer simply move on? A gargantuan Leviathan swimming through the intergalactic void, seeking new galaxies to strip bare? Or is there some deeper purpose, some final evolutionary stage for which this ceaseless consumption is merely a prelude? These are questions that chill the blood, for they suggest a destiny far grander and more terrifying than mere predation. Many mysteries still shroud the Tyranids, lingering like the ghostly afterimage of a Hive Fleet's passing. Their origin remains one of the greatest enigmas. Did they evolve naturally, an apex predator refined over countless aeons in another galaxy, driven by a primal urge to consume? Or, as some whisper in hushed tones, were they somehow created? A bioweapon, perhaps, unleashed by an ancient, long-vanished civilization upon a foe. A weapon that eventually consumed its creators and then sought new horizons to devour. There are legends of the Tyranids being driven into our galaxy by a greater, unseen threat lurking in the blackness between galaxies. A force so terrifying that even the Tyranids fled before it. This, however, remains pure speculation, a desperate hope, perhaps, that there might be something even more formidable out there to stand against them, or a greater evil that would make the Tyranids merely an unfortunate consequence. And what of the hive mind itself?
Is it truly just a collective consciousness, an instinctual intelligence that processes and reacts? Or is there a central, singular entity, a guiding will of immense power and malevolence, pulling the strings of every bioform from the deepest void to the surface of a doomed world? Some scholars, peering into the darkest corners of xenology, wonder if the hive mind possesses a form of sentience that transcends simple hunger, a cunning intelligence that learns from every defeat, adapts to every new strategy, and remembers the genetic blueprints of every foe it has ever encountered, filing them away for future assimilation or replication. It would be a terrifying thought to face not just a force of nature, but a truly intelligent adversary whose only goal is your absolute and utter erasure from existence. This, too, remains within the realm of speculation, for how can one truly comprehend the motivations of an entity so alien, so utterly devoid of empathy or conventional reason? The implications of facing such an unending tide are profound for all sentient life in the Milky Way. There can be no diplomacy with the Tyranids, no negotiation, no truce. Their language is hunger, their communication the gnawing of chitinous jaws on flesh and bone. They do not seek territory, only biomass. They do not desire conquest, only consumption. This is a war not of empires, but of existence itself. Every species, every civilization, from the lowliest Xenos enclave to the mighty Imperium of man, faces the same inescapable fate should the Great Devourer be allowed to continue its inexorable march. The galaxy is now forever under siege, its fate inextricably linked to this relentless, unthinking tide. It is an eternal war then, stretching out into a future that promises only more shadows, more desperate battles, and the slow, agonizing prospect of a galaxy devoured. The flickering flame of humanity, and indeed of all life, clings precariously to a cosmos that grows ever darker, threatened by a force that is not evil, not malicious, but simply hungry. A primal, cosmic hunger that will not rest until all life is extinguished and the stars themselves are silent.